The Albanese government has promised to usher in an Indigenous voice to Parliament this term. Labor is yet to work out that finer detail, and the opposition hasn't said yet whether they would oppose or support it. Joining me live is Northern Territory Senator Jacinta Price. Jacinta, thanks so much for your time. A lot to talk about today with the Greens in the last week or so. But first of all, this Indigenous voice to Parliament, do you think Australians are ready?
I don't know that Labor's ready for this. We have yet to see the detail of what it in fact means, what's involved and what it is that they expect Australians to vote for. I think there's always been an incredible amount of goodwill from Australia in general with regard to supporting Indigenous Australians, the advancement of marginalised Indigenous Australians, but we've all yet to see the detail of what this voice to Parliament means, and a referendum's a pretty huge call, given that there is very little detail.
Yeah, it certainly is at this moment, but I hate to talk about our Indigenous brothers and sisters as one homogenous group, because they're not, and there are different views on this within the community, isn't there?
Absolutely, there's different views, and you're right. I think we have approached, issues regarding Indigenous Australia as if we all, over 700,000 of us all think the same, and we are moving away from that narrative, which I think is great, and which I think this next Parliament now is reflecting, given that now we have 11 elected representatives in federal Parliament from all sides of politics. I think it's wonderful in terms of going forward and having those debates that are important.
Some constitutional conservatives, and I don't know whether you categorise yourself as this, are worried about what an Indigenous voice might mean. Are you?
I guess, once again, the detail's not there. I don't believe, for me personally, I think that the idea of enshrining a voice based on ethnicity, on race, is divisive in terms of us as a nation going forward. And it also suggests that being enshrined in our Constitution also suggests that we're forever going to be marginalised in some way, shape or form. I mean, every single policy that a government creates is going to affect Indigenous Australians in one way or another, just like it affects every other Australian.
Yeah.
And I don't believe it is the solution to addressing the issues that marginalised Indigenous Australians face. I think there's more practical and common sense ways to do it, and this doesn't lend itself to that.
The Green Senator Lydia Thorpe has said Parliament, quote unquote, doesn't represent her or her people. What do you think about that?
I think Lydia needs to check her intentions, because when we're represented to Parliament, we've been elected to represent all Australians, all of those within our constituency, and that's not just Indigenous Australians, that's Australians of all different backgrounds. And I think it's not helpful, it's divisive, and what solutions does she have? What are her intentions? Is she actually seeking to create a better Australia for all Australians, or is she there simply to be disruptive, which is like that naughty kid in the classroom, really? It affects all the other kids in the classroom negatively, and produces very little practical outcomes for that person and for what they, I guess, represent.
So have you alerted the Governor-General to this?
Well, I think I will be. I would certainly like to understand whether, there are grounds for whether she should be removed from Parliament, or whether she needs to be held accountable and responsible for her actions and behaviours, because as we speak, there are issues that are affecting, certainly she claims to be concerned with Indigenous Australians. There are marginalised Australians who are suffering right now from things that are going on in their communities at this very moment. And these ridiculous, this behaviour does nothing to better their positions in society and in life.
Yeah, it's kind of the same issue with Adam Bandt not wanting to stand in front of the Australian flag. Do you take exception to that?
I think it's disrespectful. It's utterly disrespectful because there are Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians who fought side by side. They put their lives on the line. There are those that lost their lives for our freedoms as Australians under a unified Australian flag. And I think it's deeply disrespectful. It's deeply divisive behaviour. And again, to suggest that Indigenous Australians are helpless victims that only people like Adam Bandt has the capacity of rescuing, or is the only person, the Greens are the only people that understand the concerns and the feelings of Indigenous Australians. It's ridiculous, and I find it insulting and racist. It's a racial stereotype to suggest that we're these helpless victims. That honestly, if we've survived this long, for over 60,000 years, what have you, then we are not these helpless victims that get upset and hurt and fall to our knees when we see the Australian flag.
So what are you talking about there? A kind of paternalistic view and like this low expectation? Twiggy Forrest used to call it the tyranny of low expectations.
Absolutely. It's the racism of low expectations that, that we can't possibly, how are we expected to, reach parity and close the gap? We've done it in Parliament. We've gone beyond. We've got more representation than ever in Parliament than what reflects the population of Indigenous Australians. And we're capable individuals in our own right. And again, it shouldn't just be a focus on our indigeneity does not make a person, and we need to move away from that way of thinking. It is most definitely paternalistic. I don't stand up and speak on behalf of all white Australians. Nobody does. So we've got to get away from sort of this notion that that certainly I know for a fact that even as a person of with a Warrapari mother, I don't speak on behalf of every single Aboriginal person in this country, and neither does any one individual.
Well, Jacinta Price, great to get your insights as always. We'll see you in Canberra, but not for another month. So we'll see you then.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me.